Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to untangle some incredibly dense, interconnected geopolitical history from our ancient source texts. We're talking about the total collapse of a nation, a really brief, fragile flicker of hope, and then an absolutely devastating betrayal.
Hey everyone, this is TN Inside. Today, we're diving into the parallel accounts found right in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 39 through 41. Now these chapters, they document a profoundly dark period in history, and we're going to break down this collapse step by step. Let's get right into it.
Act 1. The Fall. The brutal reality of the Babylonian siege.
This wasn't just some sudden overnight collapse. We're talking about a grueling 2-year strangulation of a once great city by the massive Babylonian Empire. Starting in King Zedekiah's 9th year, the city actually managed to hold out until the famine inside became absolute. Total starvation. Finally, by the 11th year, the walls were breached, and just a month later, the Babylonian commander Nebuchadnezzar arrived to finish the job. And he didn't just conquer the city, he systematically burned the temple, the royal palace, and literally leveled the city walls to the ground. Once those walls were breached, King Zedekiah tried to run, but his capture on the plains of Jericho was incredibly swift and, honestly, brutal. The psychological warfare here is just as terrifying as the physical reality. King Nebuchadnezzar actually forced Zedekiah to watch his own sons be put to death, and then, immediately after that, he had Zedekiah's eyes gouged out. So think about that. The murder of his children was literally the last thing he ever saw, before being dragged off to Babylon in chains. Just like that, Judah was left entirely without its royal leadership. So what we're looking at here is the total decapitation of a nation. It's like a complete brain drain. Babylon completely strips the city of its elite leadership and its wealth. They executed the chief priests, military officers, royal officials, and they looted all the gold, the silver, and even Solomon's massive bronze pillars. But then, look at who was left behind. It was only the poorest, the absolutely most vulnerable citizens. The Babylonians left them there simply to tend the vineyards and the fields, basically just to keep the agricultural infrastructure from completely reverting back to the wild. All right, moving on to Act 2, A False Dawn, the appointment of Gedaliah. So the dust is kind of settling, and Babylon desperately needs someone to manage this impoverished remnant that they left behind. Seeking some sort of stability, the Babylonian king installs a brand new governor, a guy named Gedaliah, the grandson of Shaphan, and they set him up at a historical watchtower location called Mizpah. Now this wasn't just a random spot on a map. Choosing Mizpah was a highly calculated geopolitical move to completely reset the administrative power center away from the ruined stronghold of Jerusalem.
And you know what? Gedaliah actually implemented a surprisingly peaceful policy of reconciliation. His message was simple: just serve Babylon without fear, and you'll live. And crazy enough, it worked. Wealthy, influential Jews who had fled for their lives to neighboring places like Moab, Ammon, and Edom during the war, they heard about this new stability and started returning to Mizpah. Even the weeping prophet Jeremiah, who had just been released by the Babylonians, actually chose to stay with Gedaliah rather than taking a comfortable life over in Babylon. So for this really fleeting moment, there was a genuine glimmer of hope, an illusion of true recovery.
But then we get to Act 3, Betrayal and Aftermath, a tragedy of naivety and ambition.
That incredibly fragile piece, it gets completely shattered by this fatal friction between two very different men. On one side, you have Governor Gedaliah. He comes from a noble family, he's pro-reconciliation with Babylon, and he's kind, but he's dangerously naive. On the other side, you have Ishmael. He's of royal descent, he's a fiercely ambitious, anti-Babylonian nationalist, and he absolutely despises this new order. And to make matters exponentially worse, Ishmael is secretly backed by King Balalis of the Ammonites, a foreign power actively trying to destabilize Judah and stop any legitimate recovery in its tracks.
Now, army commanders like Johanan saw this coming from a mile away. They urgently brought this exact warning straight to Gedaliah. Johanan actually pulled the governor aside and desperately offered to eliminate the threat, to take out Ishmael in secret just to save this fragile community from being destroyed all over again. But Gedaliah's sheer inability to comprehend evil within his own ranks was his absolute undoing. He told Johanan he was lying. He just blindly refused to believe that a fellow Jew would betray their rebuilding efforts. And the result? Just 2 months into Gedaliah's rule, the consequences of that naivete unleashed absolute carnage. In the 7th month, Ishmael showed up with 10 men. And while they were sharing a meal, which remember, in this culture is a profound, intimate symbol of trust, Ishmael draws his sword and assassinates the governor. He doesn't stop there either. He slaughters the remaining Jews and the Babylonian soldiers stationed at Mitzpah, and the cruelty doesn't even end there. The very next day, 80 pilgrims arrive from the north, deeply mourning the destroyed temple. Ishmael literally walks out weeping, pretending to mourn right alongside them. He lures these innocent men into the city, murders them, and throws their bodies into a massive, ancient cistern.
So even though Ishmael is eventually chased off to Ammon by surviving commanders like Johanan, the damage is totally irreversible at this point. The remaining people are now absolutely terrified. They know for a fact that when King Nebuchadnezzar finds out his hand-picked governor and his soldiers were massacred, his retaliation is going to be merciless. So what do? They plan to run to Egypt for safety. It's this devastating, highly ironic reversal of history. The descendants of the Exodus, terrified of Babylonian wrath, willingly fleeing right back to Egypt and leaving the Promised Land completely empty.
Which brings us to our epilogue: lessons in leadership, discernment, and a glimmer of hope. This whole tragedy really forces us to pause and reflect on the profound weight of leadership. The absolutely crucial point the text is making here is that good intentions alone, they're never enough. While Gedaliah was a genuinely good-hearted man who wanted peace, his total lack of discerning leadership, his failure to see beyond mere kindness and accurately judge evil motives, it literally cost defenseless people their lives. A true leader must have that sharp wisdom to protect the vulnerable from very real threats.
However, this incredibly heavy historical narrative doesn't end in complete darkness, because exactly 37 years into the Babylonian captivity, something entirely unexpected happens. In this truly remarkable pivot, Nebuchadnezzar's successor, a king named Evil Merodach, takes the throne and adopts a totally different, more lenient policy. He actually decides to release King Jehoiachin of Judah, who had been locked up in a Babylonian prison for almost 4 decades. And not only is the captive king released, but he's given a seat of honor that's actually higher than the other captive kings. He gets new clothes, a regular daily allowance, and he gets to dine at the Babylonian king's table for the rest of his life. It's this subtle but super powerful signal of grace within the source text, proving that the lineage of Judah wasn't fully extinguished.
So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. What truly makes a faithful and discerning leader in times of crisis? I mean, we've clearly seen how blind optimism can lead to utter ruin, but we've also seen how a tiny spark of hope can surprisingly endure through literal decades of exile. It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep analyzing those deeper structures in these ancient texts, and as always, keep learning.